Well, my dear friends, it is Wednesday evening again, and so we welcome you to this time for Bible study. We meet this day on a very special day in the annals of Moravian history, because on this day in 1415, Jan Hus was martyred. But as Brother Len will tell us shortly, it was also this day several years earlier that he was born. So we're going to be looking at tonight, our study going to be looking at this whole idea of rejection and martyrdom, and our topic, the recipe for rejection. We welcome everyone, and it's a special delight to have Elizabeth joining us from the hospital. Elizabeth, you are in our thoughts and our prayers, and what a wonder that you can join us now. And we invite Astrid, if you'd be kind enough now to lead us in the opening prayer.
Good afternoon, everyone. Let's pray. Lord of our everlasting light, we thank you for being in our life and having us gathered this afternoon to shed more light on the story of Jan Hus. Father God, your word is the lamp before our foot and the light on our path. So enlighten us, O Father, and may your spirit be the one that leads this afternoon. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Well, Brother Len, tell us about Jan Hus.
Well, I think, as you will know, Jan Hus was at the forefront of the reform movement within the Western Christian Church. And when I speak about reform, I don't speak about someone who was seeking to create a new church. What he was seeking was reform with the established church. There were matters within the church centered in Rome, which he and others were greatly opposed to, and he spoke out against these quite strongly. He was, in fact, a Roman Catholic priest, ordained, and he was also a lecturer in theology at the University of Prague. He became the rector and was an important person in that university. But his main focus was in seeking to reform the church from within. One of the grievances he had with the church was what we come to know as indulgences, where the Pope of the day created, in wishing to raise funds for the church, decided that he would create what became known as indulgences, which were really a piece of paper, a document, in which if a person confessed their sins, he would grant them total absolution, and they paid a price. They had to buy these indulgences, and that's how he raised his funds for the building of the chapel. Hus, along with others, considered this was totally wrong. To try to raise funds on the basis of forgiving sins was totally against the will of God. And in any fact, he claimed that the Pope was not in a position to forgive sins. Only one person can give us complete absolution, and that was God himself, through the blood of Jesus Christ. So this was the basis of the reform movement that he himself was involved in and was a very strong advocate. One of my pleasures in earlier days was to be able to visit Prague and to visit the Bethlehem Chapel, which was the base in which he preached many of his sermons and where his focus lay. And he gained a great following in and around from the city of Prague and further afield. Many people came to him. They came in thousands to hear him preach. And this again was frowned upon by the established church. First of all, he was excommunicated. The Pope decided that he was in error, he was in heresy, and that he was excommunicated from the church. But he continued to preach in quiet. And then, for his own safety, it was recommended to him that he took himself into self-exile. So he left Prague and went into the country for a more quiet life. But he continued to speak out against the errors that he saw within the Church of Rome. And eventually, he was invited to attend a council in Constance, where the church was meeting to hold its sort of synod, and he was invited to come and present his case. Now, he was advised not to do this by his followers because they thought it was a trap to lure him into something more sinister. But he was given a passage of conduct by the King of Bohemia, that he would stand by him and ensure that he had a safe passage both to and from Constance. Now, he attended the conference. He was immediately on arrival, he was put into a prison cell and treated very harshly. When the conference began, he was invited into the conference hall and invited not to make his case, but simply recant his proclamations. You know, he was considered he was in error and that he would have to recant. And he refused to do this because he believed assiduously in the things he stood for. But the short answer is that he was condemned by the council, taken out of the court, and burnt at the stake as a heretic. And there he fearlessly faced his death and was burnt at the stake as a martyr, a modern day martyr, if you like, of the church. And so this day is an important day in the life of the church, but none more so than in the Moravian church, because it was through Jan Hus that the movement in Bohemia began, which eventually led to the formation of the Brethren's Church, which became the national church of the Czech peoples in Bohemia and Moravia, the two neighboring kingdoms, until eventually, during the Counter-Reformation, the Church of Rome made a declaration that anyone who was a follower of Jan Hus, unless they were to would be also condemned as a heretic, as a opponent of the church. And his followers were told that they either had to return to the mother church, i.e. the Church of Rome, or to forfeit their lands and to become refugees. And many of them decided to do this. Others stayed on in Bohemia, Moravia, and continued to worship as an underground church in secret places. And of course, it was out of this in the 18th century, in 1732, 1730s, that a remnant of those left Bohemia to find a place where they could worship and follow their beliefs in comfort and unmolested, which took them to Hernut, where Hernut was founded. They in fact were on the way to seeking to travel to Poland, where one of Jan Hus's followers, Bishop Comenius, had left and taken some refugees to form a church in Poland where they could worship in unmolested. And so the pilgrims from Bohemia were seeking to seek out this place where Comenius had worked some 2 centuries earlier. And on the journey there, they arrived in Saxony, on the land of Count Zinzendorf, and there they were offered a place where they could sojourn and stay. And of course, eventually that's where the renewed Moravian Church was established. And that is what we're celebrating this year in the 300th anniversary of the founding of Herrnhut. So that's just a brief history of Jan Hus and what he stood for. And I will just also add that really the Reformation, this was 60 years before what is recognized as the official start of the Reformation with Martin Luther, when he nailed his theses on the door of the church at Wittenberg. And he also was brought before the council. And what Luther stood for was pretty well what Jan Hus had stood for, and what were his guiding principles some 60 years earlier.
Thank you very much, Brother Len, for giving us that little way in the history. Let us now listen to a little documentary film on this story Brother Len has just shared.
Welcome back to A Moment in History. I'm Seth Udinsky. In this segment, let's explore one of the most famous forerunners of the Protestant Reformation. Many church historians typically mark the beginning of the Protestant Reformation at the figure of Martin Luther, specifically in the year 1517 when he first aired his theological grievances against the Roman Catholic Church. But 100 years earlier, a man from Eastern Europe would enter the scene of church history and contend for the truth. Unlike Luther, who survived his condemnation, this man would ultimately burn at the stake for his faithfulness to Christian truth. Let's explore the famous forerunner to the Reformation, Jan Hus. Now remember, in late medieval Europe, the church looked very different than it does today. In medieval theology, the church did not allow common folk to read the Bible for themselves, and in fact, many priests could not even read the Bible. The Bible could only be read in Latin, and many people in medieval society could not understand or read Latin, which meant they did not know what the Bible said, even if they would have been allowed to read it, except for what the church told them it said. Now enter Jan Hus, born a peasant in the present-day region of the Czech Republic in Eastern Europe in 1369. His last name means goose in medieval Czech, which at first glance doesn't really seem much, but it will carry great significance as we study Hus's life, so stay tuned, that's going to come back later. Hus was greatly impacted as a young man by the teaching of the Englishman John Wycliffe, who had worked to translate the Bible to English earlier that century. In his early 30s, Hus became a priest at Bethlehem Chapel, which was one of the largest medieval churches of the time period. Hus was one of very few medieval priests who did study and understand the Bible, and through that he began to see the grave errors the church had committed against the teachings of Scripture, namely the prevention of allowing accessibility to the Bible for common folk and also the selling of indulgences. Now, indulgence sales were fast becoming commonplace in the church, and basically what happened is sinners could, for a price, purchase years off of time in purgatory or in hell for themselves or their loved ones. I hope you can see how this practice utterly distorts the gospel and the biblical teaching of justification by Christ alone. Hus certainly did. He was condemned as a heretic by the church, and in 1412, he was issued a death sentence. In 1414, Hus courageously went to the Council of Constance to give a defense for his beliefs. Now, as was the case for Luther 100 years later at Worms, Hus was promised safe passage, but safe passage was not given, and he was arrested. Hus would burn at the stake on June 6, 1415. And legend has it that as the flames engulfed him, he issued a prophecy. He said, "Today you are burning a goose." Remember, the meaning of Hus's name means goose. "But 100 years from now, you will hear a swan sing, and you will have to listen to him." And many church historians have discerned that Luther, the courageous reformer who contended for the same gospel truth as Hus, was the fulfillment of that prophecy 100 years later. Well, no matter the truth of the legendary prediction, one thing is certain: Jan Hus was a heroic example of Christian courage, trusting in the truth of God's word and the sufficiency of Christ alone for his salvation. Thanks so much for joining me once again for A Moment in History.
Well, that was excellent, and we just stopped sharing there for a little while so that you can have a chance to talk a little bit about what you have heard and to go into look at the section that we will be looking at this evening, that is to say, rejected a recipe for rejection.
Mhm.
As you've heard the story then, Uriel, Suzanne, Elizabeth, Cynthia, Astrid, is there any question or thought that would come to mind that you want to share as you've heard from Brother Len and from our commentary? Who would like to say?
You know,
Good evening.
go ahead.
Okay, we'll take Muriel and then Astrid. Go ahead, Muriel. Hello.
Yes, good evening, everyone. I'm happy that I could join and I'm awake.
We too.
Yes.
Mhm.
You know the story from Jan Hus for so many years, but today I realized that it was so many years before Herrnhut was founded. I didn't realize it before.
Yes. Yes, I mean, Hus was, well, I mean, he was martyred in 1415, and Herrnhut really was established in 1722. So that's a significant period of time. And as Brother Len would have given us in a little indication, there are many things happened between those years, between 1415. The church was established in 1457, and the further growth, further persecution, going through significant individuals like Gregory the Patriarch, Luke of Prague, Comenius, and several others who would have eventually participated in prior to the refugees moving into Eastern Germany in the beginning of the 18th century. So in a way, we can speak of Moravian history as being two parts, with the 1722, the anniversary which we celebrate this year, the 300th anniversary in the second part. Yes, thank you, Muriel. What about you, Astrid?
Yes, you know, this story goes on until today. And I like it that I can imagine what it must have been like at that time for people, followers of Hus, how they were hushed at that moment when they realized that he was burned at the stake, knowing that they did not want to stay in the Roman Catholic Church with all those things. But what I find significant and encouraging today is that the daily text for today, the Lord will be our everlasting light and your God will be your glory, is so significant and true. And it is an encouragement that we can give to everyone today who is going through from bullying to worse. You know, that they might know, well, you're not the only one, but you have a refuge, and God is your refuge. And it is not a coincidence that I shared a video with you guys just now before the session, before I came to the session, of Dr. Ragnhilda Arduin Lynch about the slavery and the heritage of that, because that also is something that has to do with rejection and human atrocities, you know.
Yes. Yes,
It
thank you,
moves me
Astrid.
today especially, yeah.
Yes, Astrid. Okay, thank you, Astrid. I don't know whether the others of us wanted to make a point on this before we go into the section in Matthew 14. Okay, well.
The three people who stand out in my lifetime as
Yes.
Martyrs, if you like, or who stand in this tradition of standing firm by what they believe in. First would have been Mahatma Gandhi, who was not necessarily a professed Christian, but a very clear thinker, and was just a religious man of the Indian tradition. But he was assassinated by someone who confounded his beliefs. The second would have been Nelson Mandela, who of course stood against slavery, was imprisoned for many years because of his, he died a natural death. And the other one, of course, would be Martin Luther King, who spoke out strongly about the difference between the treatment of those who people of color and the people who were of a less colorful complexion, if you like. But he was, of course, also assassinated. But
Yes.
these are the people who stood by their beliefs, and it always strikes me as quite intense that where people like this were prepared to carry their beliefs to the point of death or the point of punishment. And it often leaves me wondering how weak my faith is, that I don't do more to proclaim what I believe in and to speak out against things which are unjust and not in accordance with the gospel.
Thank you, Brother Len. Yes, indeed. Those are good examples of individuals who stand out by the strength of their conviction and their commitment. And so you're right to refer to those individuals alongside Hus, because these are individuals who, in a true way, they are martyrs to the faith. Well, let's look at another person who himself was crucified and was rejected and eventually crucified. And what we have here in Matthew 14, 54 to 58, if you like, the seeds of rejection are being sown. And so I want to think about this theme, what I say, recipe for rejection. Jesus comes into his hometown. So I would like to invite, if you would, if I would like someone to read from verse 54 to verse 56, and someone then read 57 and 58. Just begin.
Okay.
Afternoon.
Yeah, okay.
He came to his hometown and began to teach the people in their synagogue, so that they were astounded and said, "Where did this man get this wisdom and these deeds of power? Is not this the carpenter's son? Is not his mother called Mary? And are not his brother James and Joseph, Simon and Judas? And are not all his sisters with us? Where then did this man get all this?" And they took offense at him. But Jesus said to them, "Prophets are not without honor in their own hometown and in their own house." And he said, and he did not do many deeds of power there because of their unbelief.
Thank you very much, Cynthia. So the recipe for rejection, I want to introduce three things that I believe arising from this story. They are recipe for rejection. And I think as we talk about this, it may be helpful for us to think about the individuals that we know that have been rejected, martyred, and otherwise. And Brother Len gave us a list of very credible individuals who would stand in that stead. But what are some of the things that we would say a recipe for rejection, or if you like, the things where they provide, if you like, a risk that may lead to rejection. So let's look at the first one. I'm going to, believe it or not, I'm going to propose that the family can be a recipe for rejection. And how would that mean? You may recall Jesus in one of his sayings referring to the whole way of journeying with him. And it is in Mark's account of this same story, when he came to his hometown, they call attention to the fact that his mother and his brother and others had come to see him, and he said that those who do the will of God, so to speak, are his mother and his brother and his sister. But he also called attention to the importance of making a decision, which is a decision to follow him, which may involve taking a position that's against the position that is in his own family, in their own family. But in any case, here we have the situation. Jesus came to his hometown. And you understand what is the situation in the hometown. In the hometown, it's very difficult for the individual to conceal anything about his early growing up, or or any kind of a pretension, because people know where he has come from. Where did this man get his wisdom and these deeds of power? So they are raising for him because they know him within the context of his own people, or if you like, the context of his own family. The second passage goes on to make reference to members of his family. The thing is that he is in his hometown, and he cannot make any pretense. So just in case he is to bring any position that somehow may criticize, may be critical of what is happening in his own town, if he were to take a position that would call into question his family, his culture, if he would take a position that would somehow lead to the conclusion that he may be in some way rejecting himself, the values and the thing for which his family has stood, that is a recipe for rejection. When there is a cleavage between the values for which he stands and the values for which may be in his own town. Where did this man get all this deed? So a questioning of the, if you like, the whether there is something that might be not true. It may be something that might be false about what he is projecting, whether his wisdom is authentic, whether the deeds of power, whether they are only performances. Are we talking about trick? Are we talking about, if you like, magic? Because we know him, and as far as we know, he is no great person. So where did he get these deeds of power? So there is a capacity in his hometown for him to be questioned, because they knew what he was like growing up. They are part of his own family. So sometimes it can be very difficult to be a witness to our own family, even though that is the place where witness must begin. But even though it might not be necessarily the case within our immediate family, then moving out into the extended family, sometimes this can be a challenge for how witness is born. So Jesus is questioned, his integrity, his authenticity, and his claim for closeness to God is brought into question because he is in his hometown. But there's a sense you may say, if he cannot be a witness in his hometown, where really is he going to bear witness? Let me stop sharing for a while and see whether, before we come to the question of familiarity, which is not unlike the matters relating to his family, whether you have any kind of a view on this. Is the issue of family, would you say that you could concur in some way with this idea that that can be a risk for how one can be accepted? Any thought on this?
Yeah, there is a saying which is probably familiar to you, which says that familiarity breeds contempt. And I think this is probably an example of this, that here is this man, Jesus, who's known to them. He's one of them. He's been raised in their town. They know him. So it's not just a case of his wisdom. It's a question of authority. What authority does he have to speak out against us? So I think that's probably one of the things which is fundamental to rejection. Consideration of authority. What authority does this man have? What makes him think that he is in a position to lecture us on things that are important? So I think that is an important factor in recognizing the authority of someone having the right to speak out against those with whom he is familiar.
Yes. I'll take another point on this and then we'll move on. Yes, go ahead.
What I was thinking of, just in our situation, you have all experienced someone being different in your class, or someone having the courage to speak up when you see that injustice is taking place and not following the crowd, because most of the time it's one person who is dominant, and out of fear others follow until someone say, no, this is not like that. And it only takes one person to ridicule that person so that you suddenly find that everyone is against you. And that's the way I see the story of Jesus and all the others, because he was right, because there was fear that the underdogs who wanted to be the ones would that those would say, no, if he is really coming up with the truth, we are dead meat. So let's now come against him. And yeah, that's the way it is in the world.
Thank you, Astrid. And speaking of familiarity, we move to verses 55 through to 57, and to see why they took offense of him. Brother Len made allusion to the questioning of his authority. But in a way, there is a kind of a reputational issue that is at stake here, because what was being said to Jesus here, or concerning Jesus here, is that based on what we know and about which we can be sure, we do not know of these gifts and this talent being actually within the family. He is now posing, because they're familiar with him, he is posing a kind of reputational risk, because as far as they know, this situation is not consistent with what is known of his family. He's not this carpenter's son. He is not a scribe. His father is not a scribe. So how come is he speaking in this way? We don't know his father to be a prophet, so he's not a prophet's son. So how come he's speaking in this kind of a way? Is not his mother called Mary? We know her personally. This is someone whom we know. And as far as we know, Mary did not, by her own ordinariness in the situation in which she grew up, we don't know of her having any kind of special powers so that he could claim this. And what about his brothers, Joseph? We can call them by name. We know we are familiar with them and their history. And all his sisters are with us. Well, the names of the sisters aren't given, but that does not undermine the fact that there was a claim to his knowledge. So based on the fact that we know his father, we know his mother, we know his brothers and his sisters, they're here with us. So how come he is making this claim? This idea that they took offense at him is really a very significant term. They took offense of him. What he was doing was offensive. It was literally, that word offense comes from the Greek word scandalon, which means it was scandalous what he was doing. He was causing his family and those with whom he was familiar, he was causing them an embarrassment. The man is an embarrassment to his family. The man is an embarrassment to his community. Why is he behaving? In fact, if we read the account of this story in Mark, what they actually did at this point is that they tried to arrest him because they felt that the man was out of his mind. his mind had left him. So this familiarity was breeding much amount of contempt, and he was being challenged about the authenticity of what he had to bring. And it is for that reason we come to the third and the final bit of this recipe for rejection. Jesus said to them, prophets are not without honor except in their own country. In other words, prophets will be honored, but not at home. And sometimes individuals have to leave where they are and where they grew up so that they might be listened to elsewhere. But as a consequence of the fact that his hometown, the place where he would have been familiar, because they knew him, because they also questioned him, they questioned his authority, they questioned his integrity, they questioned his authenticity, there was a question of unbelief. He did not do many deeds of power there because of their unbelief. The word here in 58 is that he did not do many deeds of power. When we read the similar story in Mark's gospel, it is even a strengthening. It's not that he did not do any deeds of power. He could not do any deeds of power, Mark says, because of their unbelief. Not just that he did not, but he could not. The power did not work because of their unbelief. I'm going to stop sharing for a while because I think this issue is critical about when is it that there can be the acceptance of someone who is local, someone with whom we are familiar, someone with whom, so to speak, there is a sense that even though we know the person, they can be given the due regard. And could it be that the strength of unbelief has to do with this issue of familiarity, and therefore a questioning of authenticity, a questioning of authority, a questioning of the person's own suitability for this thing that they have taken up. What are your thoughts? The reality of unbelief in the world today.
It's not different, I would say. As a teacher, I often had to fight colleagues who had the belief that students from a poor background can never become a doctor or a lawyer, you know, those things. And why it would anger me, I would think, why do you come with those stereotypes, remarks? Encourage the kids to become who they want to become, get out of poverty, and be someone that takes the family out of those situations. Because even now, if you had students or even pastors who were children who were so very naughty and disruptive, when he or she becomes a pastor, you would hear, I am surprised. I would never think something good could come out of this person, you know? And then, of course, you might understand all the feelings that has lived in these persons, that they came out and really surprised the others. We can only think of David. When David came to bring food for his brothers, what did his brother tell him when he asked about Goliath, when he wanted to fight Goliath? He ridiculed him because he didn't believe that he could do it.
Yeah. Yes, and so that questioning based on the fact that we know you, so we cannot, we don't know you to have those gifts and those powers. So we're not accepting what you have to say. Sometimes, you know, the syndrome of believing the outsider, believing the one, a readiness to believe the stranger, because the person who is familiar, the person who is known, cannot, in a sense, be trusted because we know them. Any other view on this reality of unbelief?
The
Yes.
same thing with Joseph and his brother
Yes.
and his
Mhm.
dream.
Mhm.
I mean, please, your dream, you're
Mhm.
crazy. So they would not believe him. They wouldn't give him the time
Mhm.
of day. You understand? So I listen to us. It's the same thing. And back
Mhm.
home here in Jamaica, I remember when we were building the roads, the highways in here in Jamaica, and then our engineers had an issue with the government because the project was given to Chinese folks to build the highways. And our engineers had a problem with that because, as far as we're
Mhm.
concerned, they're saying, you don't believe in us. We are here. You prefer to give somebody else the job,
Yeah.
and we are here who knows the thing, and you're not. So, and it is true. People often say, "Oh, you're quicker to believe people who are outside other than those of your own." So it's
Yeah.
the same thing. Yes. Yes.
Thank you,
Mhm.
Cynthia. Murali, we're going to say something, and then Brother Len.
Yes, what I wanted to say is close from what Cynthia is saying. When our people come back from abroad, having study, and they come back to Suriname, sometimes we don't give them the chance
Mhm.
explore their knowledge. Because I think sometimes it is unbelief, but we don't want to give them the credit that they know more than us,
Mhm.
since they have gained the knowledge abroad. Then
Mhm.
them a hard time to find themselves back in society.
Yes. There's an expression before Brother Len comes in. There's an expression which is very, which sometimes we hear in this context, what they call begrudgery, that
Mhm.
sometimes the attitude to the familiar person, that somehow we don't believe that they have what it takes,
Mhm.
or we don't want them to somehow project themselves to appear to be having knowledge and skills as above us. And it is something I refer to as begrudgery. Brother Len, you're going to say something.
Yes, I was really just reflecting on the difference between acceptance and rejection within a community. If someone arises within a community who is particularly gifted, for example, as a writer or a musician, an artist, a sportsman, for example, they can soon rise to a position where they're granted hero worship. People quite happily say, he's one of us, he's one of our own, and they wallow in that glory, self-glory, the share in his success. But the difference here, of course, is that it's not a case of having that sort of brilliance. It's just a matter of the fact that they're in that case they're unchallenged. They can accept that because there is nothing challenges them. They can glory in his worship, if you like. But in the case of Jesus, he was speaking out against them. He was turning back onto them and critical of their lifestyle. Now, when that happens, of course, that is a totally different matter, whether it's one of us. The fact that it's one of us is something that is a point for rejection rather than acceptance. Who is he to tell us what we should do and what we should be thinking?
Mhm.
So this is the difference, that balance between the causes for acceptance and the causes for rejection. I think he was coming back to them and challenging them on their lifestyle, and that is the thing that was not acceptable to them.
Yes, and I think it is this questioning of where they stand, or they find themselves to be under the critical eye of his own ministry, which, we can see here the seeds of rejection being sown. It eventually will grow into a large tree of rejection where he is eventually put on a tree. So here we have the early seeds being shown, the questioning by his own hometown of his own place. And when there's a sense of when they have released or when they have removed the belt of protection from around him in this local context, you can see how, if he's not accepted in his local context, how even much more easier it is for him to be rejected at another level. So this early rejection is not an insignificant thing. But I wanted us to, as we reflect on it, to think about Jesus' own rejection and how those who come as the servants of the Lord who are walking in his steps sometimes, because of the question that they put to us sometimes, our inclination to have a kind of a negative reaction against them because what they're saying makes it a comfortable hearing for us. Mm-hmm. But also to see how we ourselves might find in our pursuit of the things which are in accordance with the will of the Lord, how that because of the familiarity with the local context and the fact that we are one with those with whom we must bring this message, that this familiarity creates a haven for unbelief. It is for that reason some of the disciples wanted, some of the hearers of Jesus wanted him to give him a sign. They wanted him to give a sign, something spectacular, something. Don't just tell us about something ordinary. Let us see the spectacular, and then we believe. Do you remember Jesus on the cross? How when they said to him, well, if you come down now, we will believe you. Come off the cross, and now we will believe you. Show us your power by dismounting the cross now that, and we will believe you, as if to say. And listen, the irony of it. He surrendered himself to that abuse, and now they're saying, unsurrender, and we will believe you. And when he said to them, I was speaking with you so many times in the temple, and you were there, but you didn't believe. And now you want me to come down from the cross so that you would believe. It's an irony, and it is certainly not the way of belief. Unbelief is real in the world, and it is a recipe for rejection.
But I also want to look at, in Jesus' case, he came, he knew why he came and what was about to take place. And as human being, he asked the Father, take this cup from me, but it's not my will, but your will be done. But in cases of human beings, sometimes many opportunities that people have, they themselves reject it because of fear of how their in-crowd will react, and then you see many talents are lost, or people go into, they become insignificant but they know what they want, but they don't have the support and they don't have the courage to come out and live it, because they don't want to go through that rejection. So they reject themselves.
Yes, and that idea of self-hate, rejection of self expresses itself sometime in us not being willing to accept those who are of our own hometown, our own family, of our own community.
There's a mini parable in the when Jesus was on the cross and the two were crucified alongside him. But one of them cried out, if you are the Son of God, rescue yourself and us. You do something for us.
Yes.
Paul said, have you got no faith in God? We are here because of our sins, because we've done this wrong. And then he turned to Jesus and said, remember me when you come into your kingdom. And Jesus was able to say to him, this day
you will.
Because one of them was looking for something in it for him, rather than realized that he wasn't worthy of anything, any salvation from Jesus. And because
Mhm.
of the acceptance of that, it gave him more power than the one who had rejected Jesus' authority.
Mhm.
Yes. So then the recipe for rejection. In other words, these are the things we should mind and be attuned to, be sensitive to. Unbelief is real. Sometimes familiarity is part of what the problem is, but even
Mhm.
sometimes it is within the reality of our own family. We have to
Mhm.
mind these things. Uriel, I'm going to ask if you would consider to lead us in the closing prayer as we ask for courage in the face of the possibility of rejection, but
Mhm.
also give us a willingness, that God to give us a willingness that we can see the saints who are his, and that we would not help to crucify his saints.
Thank you, Lord, for this evening of Bible study. Thank you that we could listen to the presentation about Jan Hus. And I ask that you lead us in coming to believe a certain amount of belief like Jan Hus, because it was because of his belief in your word that he was able to stand for what he was doing, for what he was believing. Thank you, Lord, that we can hear about people like Jan Hus and that we can try to come close and believe. Thank you for the study about where we could see how Jesus himself was rejected. And as we are rejected, we ask that we just look up to you and see your light, because it may occur to us also that people reject us because we want to share our words, the words that we read, the words that you have given us. We want to share them with other people. Lord, give us strength, give us belief in you to be able to do what you want us to do. Thank you that we can go back and see what happened all those years ago, and that will lead us to go forward. In the name of Jesus Christ, we pray. Amen.
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 Amen.